Welcome back, everybody. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to go deep.
You know, I love this stuff. So this time, looks like we're digging into some excerpts you shared from like a behavioral economics book, right?
Yeah.
Lots to unpack here, but the main theme I'm picking up on is like how our minds work, you know, especially when we're making decisions, big decisions, small decisions. It's all pretty fascinating.
It really is. And the cool thing about these excerpts is that we can pull out some practical stuff, almost like a cheat sheet, for making better decisions in everyday life.
Oh, I like that. A cheat sheet for the brain. Okay, so let's jump in. You ever notice how sometimes you just go with your gut, you get that gut feeling about something, and you just roll with it?
Yeah.
And other times you really think things through, weigh all the options. Well, this book kicks off with this idea that our minds actually use two totally different systems for making these decisions.
Yeah, exactly. System one and system two, they call them. So, system one, that's all about speed. It's like your brain's autopilot, always running in the background, making these quick judgments based on patterns and even just your emotions at the time.
So that's where those gut feelings come from. It's like
Right.
my system one is saying, hey, I've seen this before, go this way.
Exactly. Now, system two, that's different. It's the slower, more thoughtful part of your brain. This is the system that gets going when you're like solving a really tough problem or, trying to make a big decision where you really got to think it through, more like a pilot, carefully checking the instruments and plotting the course.
Okay, so two systems, got it. But then why wouldn't we just use system two all the time? I mean, if it's so good at making careful decisions, why let system one ever
Oh,
take over?
well, there's catch. System two. It's kind of lazy, to be honest. Takes
Uh,
a lot of effort to fire it up. And our brains, well, they like to save energy whenever they can. So we often default to system one, especially when we're tired or stressed or like bombarded with information.
I can definitely see that. Sometimes my brain just wants to switch to autopilot. But this brings in another question. When can we actually trust those gut feelings? Is there ever a time when going with system one is the right move?
Now, that's where it gets really interesting. The book talks about this idea of expert intuition. And it turns out that in certain situations, those gut feelings, they can be incredibly accurate.
Really? So, like, you're saying some people have a sixth sense or something?
Well, not quite a sixth sense, but more like think of a firefighter who just knows which way a fire is going to spread, or like a chess master who sees 5 moves ahead just by glancing at the board.
So they've developed some kind of superpower.
Not exactly a superpower, but it is pretty amazing. It comes down to pattern recognition. These experts, they've spent years, sometimes decades, practicing and getting feedback in their field. So their system one has basically processed tons and tons of situations and outcomes. They've learned to recognize these subtle cues that most people would totally miss.
So it's like their system one has become the superpowered pattern detector, right? Picking up on all those little hints that tell them what's going to happen next.
Exactly. And that's why their intuition seems, almost superhuman sometimes. But even the best experts, they can get things wrong, especially if they're dealing with something outside their area of expertise or if they don't have all the information they need.
Makes sense. Even the best autopilot can't navigate without a map, right? But this makes me wonder, if experts can train their intuition to be that good, why do us regular folks make so many dumb decisions? Is it that our system one just isn't as well trained?
Well, that's definitely part of it, yeah. But there's something else at play, too. It's these things called cognitive biases. These are like
Right.
mental shortcuts or blind spots that can mess up our thinking, even when we think we're being totally logical.
Cognitive biases. I've heard that term before, but I'm not sure I really get it. Can you give me like a real world example?
Absolutely. Let's talk about the halo effect. It's really common. Basically, our first impression of someone or something can affect how we judge them later on, even if that first impression was based on something totally superficial.
Okay, so like if I meet someone who's really charismatic and good looking, I might assume they're also smart and trustworthy, even if I don't actually have any proof of that.
You got it. We're basically giving them extra points based on that first impression. And this halo effect, it pops up everywhere. Hiring decisions, what products we buy. Remember how we were talking about that company with the really impressive website? Could be the halo effect in action right there. You like their design, so you felt more positive about their actual services too.
Wow. Yeah. I'm starting to see how these biases can really trip us up. So is there any way to avoid them, or are we all just destined to make bad decisions?
Well, step one is awareness, right? Just knowing these biases exist and knowing that we're all susceptible to them, that helps us be a little more critical of our own thinking. But this book goes beyond that. It actually gets some really practical strategies for like taming our intuition and making smarter choices.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Yeah.
What's the secret? How do we become better thinkers?
One of the biggest things is slowing down, like actually engaging that system too.
So hit the pause button on the autopilot and, like, take the wheel ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes that means getting other perspectives or just taking the time to gather more information before you jump into a decision. There's this study they talk about in the book, and it found that even experienced interviewers, their gut feelings about job candidates were only accurate after they'd actually collected some solid data first. They had to resist that urge to just go with their initial impression.
That's pretty wild. So even with tons of experience, you can't just rely on your gut all the time. You got to do your homework. Okay, what about this confirmation bias thing? It sounds kind of sneaky.
Oh, it can be. Confirmation bias is that thing where we tend to look for information that backs up what we already believe, and then we ignore or downplay anything that contradicts us.
Oh, yeah, I totally do that.
Yeah.
Especially, like, if I'm arguing about politics with someone, I'm totally guilty of cherry-picking evidence to prove my point.
Happens to the best of us. It's just human nature, right?
Yeah.
But if we're not careful, confirmation bias can lead us to make some really bad choices, both in our personal life and professionally, too.
Okay, so how do we avoid that trap? Is it even possible to be, like, completely objective?
Well, it's definitely a challenge, but there are some things we can do. One is to actively seek out different perspectives, even if they make us a little uncomfortable. It's about exposing ourselves to those viewpoints that we might not normally agree with and actually trying to understand why someone might believe something different than us.
Right. Expanding your horizons and all that makes sense. Okay, the book also talks about this loss aversion thing. Sounds pretty important.
It is. It's the idea that the pain of losing something hits us way harder than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value.
Oh, I get that. Like, if I lose $100, it feels way worse than finding $100 feels good.
Exactly. And this can have a huge impact on how we act, especially when it comes to investing. People sometimes hold on to stocks that are losing money, even when it'd be smarter to sell. They're trying to avoid that pain of actually admitting the loss.
Interesting. It's like we're so scared of locking in a loss that we make decisions that aren't really in our best interest. So knowing about this loss aversion, is there a way to, like, overcome it?
Well, one thing you can try is reframing the situation. Instead of focusing on what you might lose, try focusing on what you might gain by doing something different. Say you're holding on to that losing stock. Ask yourself, would I buy the stock right now at this price? If the answer is no, then maybe it's time to move on, even if it feels kind of painful to sell.
Okay, yeah, I like that. Turning that fear of loss into something that actually motivates you. So the book also mentions using external tools to help us make better choices. What does that mean?
Well, sometimes our gut feelings and emotions can really cloud our judgment, especially in tricky situations or when the stakes are high. So using something outside ourselves, like a checklist or an algorithm or even just a simple formula, it can be a surprisingly powerful tool.
You mean, like, taking ourselves out of the equation can actually lead to better results?
Sometimes, yeah, it's not about ignoring your judgment completely, but more about recognizing that we all make mistakes, right? And using a more objective system can help us avoid those pitfalls. The book actually uses the example of the APGAR score, that checklist they use with newborns. It's super simple, but it revolutionized newborn care. By standardizing the assessment, doctors were able to drastically reduce infant mortality rates.
Wow, so even a simple checklist can make a huge difference. So I guess it's about having some kind of framework or guidelines to help you make choices that are more consistent and, well, more rational.
Yeah, that's the idea. And this applies to all kinds of situations, not just medical stuff. Say you're making a big financial decision, like buying a house. Having a checklist of all the important factors can keep you from making an impulsive choice based on emotion.
Totally. Okay, I got to ask about mental accounting. It sounds like one of those things that can really mess you up if you don't know about it.
Yeah, for sure. Mental accounting is how we tend to treat money differently, depending on where it came from or what we plan to use it for. We're more willing to spend money we won gambling than money we earned working, for example. Even though it's all the same, really.
Oh, yeah, totally. Fun money versus serious money.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. And this mental accounting can sometimes trip us up. We might stress over spending $10 on a latte, but then drop $100 on dinner without a second thought, just because we've put those expenses in different mental categories.
It's like we're playing tricks on ourselves, justifying our spending based on these made-up categories. So how do we stop falling into those mental accounting traps?
One way is to try and view all your money as interchangeable. Don't create all these separate mental accounts. Instead, focus on your overall financial goals and make spending decisions based on what's best in the long run.
Makes sense, taking a bigger picture view. So the book also talks about this tendency to overestimate the likelihood of rare events. Like, why do we do that?
It's because of something called the availability heuristic. It basically means we judge the likelihood of something happening based on how easily we can think of examples. So like if you just saw a news story about a shark attack, you might suddenly think you're way more likely to get attacked by a shark, even though statistically it's super unlikely.
It's like those vivid images stick in your mind, and then they mess with your perception of how dangerous something actually is.
Exactly. And this bias can have some pretty big consequences. For example, a lot of people are way more scared of flying than driving, but driving is actually statistically much more dangerous. It's just that plane crashes get a lot more attention, so they feel more common, even though they're not.
It's like those dramatic headlines end up shaping our reality, even when the facts say something different. So how do you fight that availability bias?
Be mindful of what you're reading and watching, and ask yourself, is this really giving me an accurate picture? Also, try to look for data and statistics that can give you a more objective view of the actual risk.
Good point.
Mm-hmm.
Don't let the headlines hijack your thinking.
Mm.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about, downsides of intuition and all the ways our minds can play tricks on us. But are there times when going with your gut is actually a good strategy?
Definitely. Intuition is a huge asset, especially if you have a lot of experience in a particular area. Think about a doctor who can tell what's wrong with a patient based on really subtle clues, or an entrepreneur who can spot a great business opportunity that everyone else misses.
So it's not about ditching intuition altogether. It's about knowing when to trust it and when to, maybe take a step back and think things through a bit more.
Exactly. It's all about finding that sweet spot between your intuitive system one and your more thoughtful system two.
This has been super interesting. We've covered a lot of ground biases, mental accounting, intuition versus logic. But I'm curious to explore one more thing. How can all this knowledge actually help us live happier, more fulfilling lives? Is that something the book talks about?
Oh, yeah, it definitely does. It actually gets into some really cool stuff about happiness and well-being.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Most people think happiness is just about like having more good stuff and less bad stuff happen to you, right? But it sounds like this book goes deeper than that.
Yeah, it challenges that whole idea. It digs into how we actually experience happiness and how our memories of those experiences can shape how satisfied we are with life overall.
So you're saying it's not just about what happens to us, but how we remember it later.
Exactly. The book talks about two selves, the experiencing self and the remembering self. So the experiencing self, that's the one in the moment, feeling all the sensations and emotions as they're happening.
Okay, so that's like your internal sensory recorder, capturing all the ups and downs of daily life. What about the remembering self? That's the one that creates the story, right?
Mhm.
The one that shapes how we see our past and look to the future.
You got it. And here's where it gets interesting. Those two selves don't always agree. The remembering self can actually distort our memories, focusing on the most intense parts or how things ended, and kind of ignoring how long something lasted or even the overall quality of the experience.
Wait, so you mean if I go on vacation and I'm totally stressed out most of the time, but the last day is amazing, I'll remember the whole trip as being awesome.
That's the idea, yeah.
Yeah.
The book calls it the peak end rule, and it explains why we might repeat experiences that weren't really that great overall, just because our remembering self has kind of edited the memory to be more positive.
Wow, that's kind of trippy, right? It makes you wonder how much of what we think of as our happiness is actually based on these unreliable memories.
It's a great point. The book doesn't give a definitive answer, but it encourages us to pay attention to that tendency. It suggests we might find more genuine happiness by focusing on the quality of our experiences in the moment, instead of dwelling on the past or chasing some future happiness that may never come.
So it's more about being present and appreciating those little joys that we often overlook.
Right. Shifting the focus from achieving happiness to actually experiencing it. Of course, the book also acknowledges that our happiness is influenced by stuff we can't control, like our genetics and our circumstances.
True, true. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we react to it at least.
Exactly. And, the book also challenges that whole idea that happiness is tied directly to how much money you have. Sure, having enough money to cover your basic needs is super important for well-being. But beyond that, having more wealth doesn't always make people happier.
Yeah, that old saying, money can't buy happiness. It's kind of true. But why is that? Why doesn't more money automatically equal more happiness?
Well, one reason is adaptation. We get used to our circumstances, and once our basic needs are met, we tend to set our sights on new desires, and we start comparing ourselves to others. So it's like this hedonic treadmill where we're always striving for more, but we never really reach a state of lasting contentment.
Ah, so our expectations are always rising and we can never quite catch up.
Pretty much, yeah. The book suggests that we might find more happiness by focusing on things like gratitude, building strong relationships, and doing things that give us a sense of meaning and purpose.
I like that. Finding joy in the simple things and focusing on what really matters.
Exactly. And this actually ties back to that whole idea of the remembering self, right? By creating positive experiences and memories in the present, we're not only enjoying life more now, but we're also setting ourselves up for more happiness in the future.
I love that. It's about making choices that align with our values and that will contribute to our well-being in the long run, even if those choices don't always lead to the biggest paycheck or the fanciest job title, right?
That's it. The book encourages us to think about what truly matters and then design our lives around those things, whether it's spending more time with loved ones, being creative, or giving back to our community.
This deep dive has been so insightful. It's made me rethink how my mind works, and it's given me some great tools for making better choices that will hopefully lead to a happier and more fulfilling life.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, this is just a glimpse of what's in the book. There's so much more to explore in there.
Definitely. But you've given me a great starting point. I'm definitely adding that book to my reading list. And for everyone listening, if you want to learn how to make smarter decisions, manage your emotions, and create a life that truly reflects your values, I highly recommend checking it out.
Couldn't agree more. And remember, it's a journey. Be patient with yourself, stay curious, and keep those minds open.
Great advice. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep learning.